Hi, everyone. Welcome to our session on SQL Server running in Azure Virtual Machines. I hope everyone is enjoying their summit so far. We are going to talk a little bit today about the experience of running SQL Server in Azure Virtual Machines. First things before I even get to introductions is everyone be kind. We could make this slide a lot more concise, right? Okay. So my name is Pam Lahoud. I am a principal program manager with Azure Data at Microsoft. My team is officially called the Modernized to Azure team, and I am the lead technical PM for SQL Server running in an Azure virtual machine. And I'm joined today, and you can find me on Twitter as SQL Goddess. And I'm joined today by two of my colleagues who are also PMs on the Azure Virtual Machine team. So I will hand it over to Aditya first.
Thank you so much, Pam. It's a pleasure to present this with you. My name is Aditya. I'm a PM at Microsoft, essentially working on SQL Server on Azure Virtual Machines and control plane aspects of it, as in SQL Server IaaS Agent Extension and everything around it. You can blame me if it is going wrong. You can thank me if it's going right. So, yeah.
Thanks, Aditya. And then also we have Rajesh.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, thanks, Aditya. Hi, everyone. My name is Rajesh. I work as a program manager in the SQL team. I'm currently focusing on HADR technologies in SQL VM. So I work along with Aditya and Pam. We work as in the same team. Yeah, back to you, Pam.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. All right, let's jump in. So what we're going to talk about today is just kind of some things that you might need to know if you're already familiar running SQL Server on premises and you're thinking about bringing it into the cloud, or you're already running it in an Azure virtual machine. We're going to talk about some of the aspects of just kind of how things work when you move into Azure, because it definitely can be a little bit different than when you're running on-prem. So the Azure SQL Server on Azure Virtual Machine, which is sometimes called, you might hear SQL VM or Azure SQL VM. It's kind of referred to by a few different names. This is part of the Azure SQL family. So the Azure SQL family is made up of SQL Server running on Azure Virtual Machines, Azure SQL Managed Instance, and Azure SQL Database. And Azure SQL Database also includes things like serverless, hyperscale, elastic pools, but anything that has to do with kind of running a single single database or a single pool of databases in Azure. So managed instance and Azure SQL Database are what we call PaaS, or platform as a service. So that's like a more fully managed service. Whereas SQL Server running on Azure Virtual Machines is IaaS, or infrastructure as a service. So this is where you control the operating system, you control everything within the guest VM, and you also control SQL Server. So essentially, this is the same SQL Server product that you are running on premises. You can choose whichever version you'd like to run. You can configure it the way that you'd like to configure it. The difference is you don't have to support that infrastructure. So you rely on Azure services for that. So SQL Server and Azure Virtual Machines, like I said, it's the same SQL Server that you're used to running on-prem. So for the most part, the experience of managing it and maintaining it is going to be very much the same as on-prem. The difference is you've got some assistance from Microsoft in a lot of different areas. You can have lower TCO because we manage a lot of the services, the underlying infrastructure for you. And we also offer you some built-in free security and management tools to help make your job a little bit easier and to help do some of those day-to-day tasks that you have to do, like securing your databases and your SQL Server, like doing backups and things like that. Aditya is going to talk all about that when we get to that section on the SQL IaaS Agent Extension. We also have, and this is what Rajesh is going to talk about, we have some HADR, again, technologies that you're already familiar with, availability groups and failover clusters. You can do all of that in Azure. It's just a little bit different how you set it up and configure it. So Rajesh is going to talk to you about that. But the bottom line that we want to get to is this is the SQL Server you know and love. It's just made a little bit easier by running it in Azure. One of the great cost benefits also about running SQL Server in Azure Virtual Machine, and this is one of those things that goes to TCO, is if you are already running SQL Server on premises, you may already have software assurance, which gives you some additional benefits for running in Azure. So with software assurance, you can actually take your on-prem licenses and move them into the cloud. So you don't have to pay the pay-as-you-go prices for SQL Server that you would pay if you were born in the cloud. If you have these on-prem investments already, you can take those licenses and run them in the cloud. And that's something that we call Azure Hybrid Benefit. So with Azure Hybrid Benefit, you also get some additional HADR benefits that can really help lower your costs for running high availability and disaster recovery solutions. So if your primary virtual machine is in Azure, you can have up to one passive secondary for HA and one passive secondary for DR. So you can have two additional replicas, one for high availability, so that would generally be a synchronous replica if you're talking about AG, and you can have an asynchronous replica as well for DR, and both of those instances are free SQL Server licensing. So you would just pay for the compute for those VMs. You don't have to pay for the licensing. Similarly, if you're running with your primary instance on-prem, but you want to have a little bit of extra coverage for disaster recovery in a different data center, you can leverage Azure VMs for that as well. So you pay for your primary instance on-prem, and then you don't have to pay licensing for that HA secondary or the DR secondary, and then you can have an additional DR replica in Azure. So you can have up to 3 passive replicas for no additional SQL Server licensing charges. So this is a great benefit of software assurance and Azure Hybrid Benefit when you're running in Azure VM. One more little nice benefit of running in Azure is free extended security updates. So if you are still running SQL Server 2008 and now SQL Server 2012, now that SQL Server 2012 is also out of support, then you can get free extended support if you move those SQL Server instances into Azure VMs. So this is a way that you can have a little bit of extra time to upgrade and move off those older versions, but still get security updates and still remain compliant with your instances. So this is another great benefit of running an Azure VM. So some cost benefits, some management benefits. We're going to talk about all of this today and all of the good stuff that you get for running SQL Server in Azure VM, because after all, like we like to say, we're Microsoft, we know how to run SQL Server. So SQL Server just runs better on Azure. That's end of marketing spiel into technical aspects. Okay, so let's kind of dig in here and talk a little bit about deploying and managing your SQL Server on an Azure VM. Hopefully I've already sold you on why you want to do it. So the first thing is you need to choose what kind of virtual machine you're going to run your SQL Server on. You know, when you're on-prem, you're usually buying hardware out for like a 3 or 5 year cycle. You're thinking about growth. You're thinking about, you know, how big is this thing going to get? How much data do I need? In Azure, you can kind of scale as you go. So you're really looking closer at what exactly do I need? And there are so many different choices. So you may look at the list of virtual machines and go, I have absolutely no idea which one to pick. Honestly, there are 365 different VM sizes in Azure, so it can be challenging to figure out which one you want. So for SQL Server, we recommend sticking with the memory optimized VM series for most of your needs. So this is the E series VMs, the M series VMs, and also the DS-V2 1115 series. These are all memory optimized, which means they have a higher amount of memory per core than some of the other virtual machines available. So these M series VMs are like really big, lots of memory. Those are for like your data warehousing systems. E series is more the target that we normally go for. There are also some general purpose VMs as well. So if you have, like, let's say maybe for some test systems, or if you have like a lighter weight SQL Server that doesn't have a lot of load on it, or for, you know, if it's a small company that doesn't have very many connections to their database or just doesn't have a, you know, a tremendous amount of load, then these general purpose VMs might also be right for you. But I would say if you're not sure what you need, stick with the memory optimized, because those are going to give you the best chance of having the best performance. And in fact, our favorite one right now, which I'm adding sprinkles to, is the EDS-V4. EDS-V4 is a great VM series for most of your SQL Server workloads. And then if you listen to any of the sessions or any of the announcements from Ignite, you might have heard about what's going to be our new favorite VM, and that is the EBDSV5. I know it's a lot of letters, letter soup there, but this gets double sprinkles because this is like primo for SQL Server workloads. This has currently double the throughput of any VM that's available. It's got a much greater IO throughput to core ratio. It's also got that great high memory ratio, 1:8 core to memory ratio for SQL Server workloads. This thing is like the best for SQL Server. So this is in public preview right now, and then it will be going to GA sometime next year. And I am super excited about this one. This is going to be the flagship VM for all of your SQL Server needs. So I just got a quick overview. I published a blog about this EBDSV5 series. So you can go out and find that. Talks about 30% better price performance. So you can see here the price perf ratio is really dramatically improved over our old EDSV4 series. So I'll let you go take a look at that blog and read about this new series, but we are super excited about this one. And if you think you might be interested in signing up for that preview, I've got a short link, short URL for you here. Sign up EBSV5 preview, and you can go and try out those new VMs. Okay, so to summarize that sizing bit, so the EDSV4, this is right now currently available. This is the best price performance for most of your SQL Server workloads. So if you're deploying SQL VMs right now, I would encourage you to look at that series first. Then we have the M series VMs. These are a little bit more expensive, but these are great for big data warehouses. They've got lots of memory, decent amount of IO throughput. They're just a little pricier. So look at these if you have a more high-end OLTP workload or big data warehouses. And then we've got that DSV2 series. This has a little bit less memory, but it's a good entry-level SQL Server. So for what's available today, these are your best bet. EDSV4, again, that's our favorite one with the sprinkles, and then double sprinkles for the EBDSV5 series when that gets released. Okay, so that's a little bit about how you're going to configure your infrastructure for SQL Server VM, but I'm going to hand it over to Aditya. Aditya is going to talk a little bit more about the portal and all the different tools that are available to you when you're running your SQL Server in Azure. So I'll go ahead and hand it off to you, Aditya.
Thank you so much, Pam.
Sure.
Let me share my screen.
Yeah, I'll give you some time to share your screen.
Let me know once you guys see my screen.
I see your screen. Thanks, Aditya.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you, Pam. As Pam mentioned, like we are working in getting a very good hardware where SQL Server runs great in a virtual machine. While we know that this is the hardware that we are striving for, there are few things we think that we want to enable our customers such that they can configure their SQL Server with the best practices. The first place that we want to start with is the marketplace images. I'm sure like most of the people who come to this summit are very well known with SQL Server, and I really need not really dwell into what marketplace image means, but to be very quick on this, right? So if you go to Azure, go to Marketplace, there are SQL servers already configured for you. There are virtual machines with SQL servers already configured for you. But if you go look at those SQL servers, when you're configuring, when you're taking this Marketplace image and configuring SQL Server, the thing that you would do is you can configure many best practices while you're configuring that Marketplace image. Previously, till date, or like right now also, there are very few that you can do it. Like you can say essentially which port you want to use. You can essentially say, hey, I want to use mixed mode or a SQL authentication. I want to use Azure AKV, Azure Key Vault integration, all that. Also, you can apply, as Pam mentioned, you can apply AHP license directly from the portal when you're configuring. Now, this is all good, right? But we have heard the feedback from the community. So community is the main feedback from which we take the feedback, and we have heard the feedback. And what we did is we we are working on revamping entire marketplace images. The way we are trying to do is we kind of kept ourselves in the DBA shoes and we said, okay, what does a DBA want? With especially DBA wants what exactly how you set up SQL Server in the on-prem also. So hence we added all the bells and whistles that a normal on-prem setup would have. You will have all those bells and whistles while you're configuring a marketplace image. You can move your system databases from one place to one place. You can configure your max server memory. You can choose your collation, all those things. And apart from that, we are also integrating few troubleshooting tools such as Log Scout, TSS, and others. Why? Let's say you are on Azure, you want to raise a case, you found a performance problem, you want to raise a case with CSS, and CSS would come and say, hey, can you please install this tool? We won't want to do it. Instead of doing all that back and forth, what we did is we will ship those tools with you for free, such that you can whenever there is a case raised, you can just within a snap of a finger, they can use those tools and troubleshoot the issues. So I'm really excited about this factor because it is really bringing closer to what a DBA really wants, and I'm excited how you folks will use this. And coming to next. Uh, when you saw when Pam is explaining, and I don't know if you have read our blog on how to really get the biggest buck for your price perf, as in I can link that blog. I'm sure there are blogs in the last slide. What exactly it means is the way you configure storage in Azure, by that matter in any cloud, is kind of different to how you configure in on-prem. The reason is on-prem you have your SAN admin, you have your own racks and your own servers, your own storage area network, and you can carve this, and it is dedicated to your to you only, your enterprise only, and you can play a lot. But when you come to cloud, a public cloud, you need to be very sure of how you configure your storage, because that's where the sweet part of performance lies. So what we did is we essentially tried to make configuring storage pools very easy by in marketplace image, there is something called storage config. If you go here, there is this change configuration. If you click on that, you will be getting to this blade where it is called configure storage. You can say, hey, I want X amount of this for data, Y amount of this for log, and here is where I want to place the TempDB. When you do that, what exactly we do is we go in the backend, we try to create a storage pool with those number of disks, we stripe them and give it to you, such that you get the maximum amount of performance when you're configuring your SQL Server. Now, when we looked critically to it, we thought, okay, there is so much scope that we can. There is so much scope of improvement here too. So we improved here too. How we improved? We embraced with more number of intelligent warnings. So right now, what you are seeing is when you have, let's say, the maximum number of disks that can configure in a single virtual machine is 12, and you configure 8 for a log and 8 for data. We immediately go back and kind of understand and give you the suggestion. Not just that, we just won't stop there. We will say, hey, you are not configuring your storage optimally because this is a disk, this is a VM with X amount of capacity, but you are configuring Y amount of IOPS. So we will try to educate and give as many as intelligent warnings as possible, such that we can guide you to create the exact storage configuration possible. The same goes with TempDB. TempDB is a favorite topic for all of us, right? So configuring TempDB is an important thing when you're running a mission critical SQL Server. So configuring number of TempDB files, configuring them with the equal size, all that. everything is completely defined in when you are configuring storage. So all of this is coming late November. Please watch out. Please watch out for a blog or an article from our team. We are going to tell you folks with all the ways possible. So this is coming in late November. This is something that we are excited about. Now, so yeah, now we have configured SQL Server. Now, how do I manage that SQL Server? It's the same, as Pam mentioned previously, it's the same SQL Server. You can manage the SQL Server using SSMS, Azure Data Studio, PowerShell. Also, because we know how to run the SQL Server, because all of us strive to make running SQL Server easy, we also took a critical look and we said, okay, we would want to make running that SQL Server more easy in a public cloud platform. We would want to give almost all manageability capabilities, which a DBA generally does, using something called SQL Server IaaS Agent Extension. What is a SQL Server IaaS Agent Extension, right? It's nothing but a piece of software that will stay in your virtual machine when you subscribe to it, when you register to it. If you are greater than 2016 and above, we go and we give you a lightweight SQL Server IaaS Agent Extension by default. But if not, if you are in 2014 or 2012, you might need to subscribe to it. You might need to register to it. If you register to it, we will install a SQL Server IaaS Agent Extension in lightweight mode. I will kind of show you how to do that easily, very easily, per subscription. So what does this SQL Server IaaS Agent Extension do? And why did we create, and what is the value that you will get, right? So SQL Server IaaS Agent Extension, we initially started for managing the licenses. So we want to show our DBAs or the people customers who use the SQL Server, all of the SQL Server farm in one glass of paint, and one single frame where they can. I don't get it right. One single frame where.
It's okay. Pane of glass.
Pane of glass. Thank you. So one single pane of glass where you go and see where is your MI, where is your VMs, where are your DBs, all of that in one single pane of glass. So yes, I did it. So that is one. And once you get it, as Pam mentioned, there are multiple license benefits that you get when you run SQL Server on Azure, right? So you want to, if you have picked a virtual machine in marketplace image and you created a pay-as-you-go image, and later you realize, hey, my company has a software assurance, and how do I switch from pay-as-you-go to AHB and take all the license benefits? Yes, you can do it if you have SQL Server IaaS Agent Extension in a click of a button. I will try to demo that to you. And the same goes with backups, HADR, and everything. The most important thing that I care is the compliance and the licenses, because when some audit hits me, I really need to make sure I'm really accounting for the right amount of licenses. You can account for right amount of licenses by looking at all your SQL Server, by giving them right amount of licenses then and there using SQL Server IaaS Agent Extension. So this is all about the features. We will go do a demo. We will understand what all the features, walk through that. But one thing I really want to show is the Microsoft Defender on SQL VM Blade. I want to talk about this and the assessments pretty quick before I jump into the demo. The reason is these are the new things that came. So see, when you go to SQL Server Virtual Machine Blade, I will show you that. When you go to SQL Virtual Machine Blade, there is this Microsoft Defender. So what does it do? It will detect your SQL injections. It will understand your different vulnerabilities that you have in your SQL Server, and it will let you know, hey, you are running XP command shell. Do you want to do that? You have a SA owner, do you really want to do that? If not, you can go remediate it then and there. Not just that, there are n number of rules that we have worked with different agencies to find out what are the different security rules that the SQL Server should have. We embraced it. We have kept there, and it will go scan your SQL Server and tell you what are its findings, what are its recommendations, and lets you remediate then and there. So this is live. This you can, if you have a SQL Server IaaS Agent Extension, you can see in the SQL VM blade right now. Then SQL assessment for SQL Server in Azure Virtual Machines, right? So this is something that we work and why it is very important if I say, so there will be so many SQL servers in our farm, right? And you might or might not have given all the best practices that you have taught to all the SQL servers. If you go and run this assessment will go think about all scan all the findings, and it will say your max server memory is not set right, your 10 dB is not really equally sized, all that. Majority of the best practices were there in this SQL assessment. It will go scan your SQL Server and compare against it and gives you a nice good report, and you can essentially remediate them. Also, you can schedule this assessment report and such that you can always say, did I go through all the best practices? Did I go through all the best practices every month and say, hey, yes, my best, I have made sure that all the best practices are being taken care for the virtual machine, for the SQL Server that I'm running for the Azure Virtual Machine. And let's switch to the demo, right? Pam, I'm doing good with the time.
Yes, sir. You are doing great with time. You've got plenty.
Okay, cool. So now you go to the Azure portal and type in SQL Virtual Machines. You will be landing here. Now, SQL Virtual Machines, as I mentioned, SQL Virtual Machine, this view itself has all the virtual machine SQL VMs that you can see. It tells you the resource group you are in, the license you have, the version that you have, the edition, the location, and the subscription. Not just that, you can go to Azure SQL and you can find virtual machines, managed instances, databases, and everything in one frame. So now let's go back to SQL Virtual Machines. I was talking about how to get this IaaS agent extension, right? If you go click this, if you go to SQL Virtual Machine and click this, that is automatic SQL Server VM registration, there is something called this window pops up, and you can essentially take a single subscription, whatever subscription you want, and say MSFT, whatever, and say, I am accepting the terms and terms for this, and you say register. If you have the contributor access to that subscription, you will be able to go ahead and register all the VMs that are there in the subscription, which have SQL servers. Not just what are there. In future, if you have installed SQL Server in a virtual machine in that subscription, that will also be automatically registered. You need not do this again and again. Per subscription, one single time. That's it. That's what you need to do. Now let's go to the VM itself, right? So I was talking about all the features. Now let's start with this overview stuff, right? So this in this overview, all you have is where are your data files, where are your log files, what are their sizes, all that. So it's a simple graph that you can see. Now this is simple. Now that is there. Now then the other thing that you have is the SQL Server license. This is what I'm talking about. If you have, when you go to configure, you can shift from pay as you go to Azure Hybrid Benefit to HADR there, and then you can apply and it will take care of your licensing. Your bill comes with that. Now, I'm sure Pam just spoke about different stuff. So, but this is very important when, if you think about it, because let's say you have an always-on configuration. You have configured your secondary. You are not really using it for read purposes. Then configuring that as HADR will give you free license because you have configured your primary also in Azure. That's the benefit that you have because you are running in Azure. So I would suggest you go and check your Azure subscriptions today and see if there are any HRDR real secondaries that you are not using today. Please go and change that to HRDR, and if you have AHUB, please do apply for it. That is going to save your money right away. So, and I'm talking about SQL licenses. I'm not talking about the compute. You still have to pay for the compute. Now, the other thing is the edition. So I get many questions. Hey, Aditya, can I just change the edition here? Answer is no. I want to say that you need to go change your edition in your virtual machine. How you generally change using MSI, you need to go change it and then come here and change the edition here. Then why are you keeping this here? The answer is for the billing. It's not for anything else. It's for the billing. So for billing purposes, we do keep this here such that you understand I am paying a standard edition virtual machine when I'm coming here. It is for you to understand, and it is for also us to understand what we need to charge for. So that's the reason why it is there. Now, the other important feature that we have is the automated patching. So this automated patching, this is also kind of confusing. Let me be very clear here. This automated patching doesn't do CUs and SPs. Automated patching is only for the critical security updates for SQL Server. So when you enable this feature using SQL Server IaaS Agent Extension, it will, and you give a downtime, you give the maintenance schedule, you give the start time, and how much time do you think it has the maintenance schedule. It will go search for the GDPR or the security updates that you have. It will go apply those security patches in that maintenance window and come back. So that's what it is used for. This feature is essentially targeted to make your SQL Server extremely secured. Now, are there any plans for us for CUs and SPs? Please do watch our blogs and our space. We might have some news for you in future. So that is for patching. Coming to backups. So this is one feature everyone uses, right? So if every database, maybe dev, test, production, everything, the important thing is to have backups. Now, you can configure backups using SQL Server IaaS Agent Extension per instance. As in, we will use the managed backup that we have that we have shipped with SQL Server 2014 and later developed with SQL Server 2016. We use that and we developed a wrapper on top of it where you can give the retention period and you can configure, you can back up your databases straight to an URL. So when you, what is the importance of it? When you, essentially what you're doing is you are not really storing your backups in your local. You are essentially storing your backups in an URL, in a storage account, in a blob, which can be accessed cross region, and you can take it from there and use those backups anywhere. So though it is sounding like a small feature, but it is really used a lot because you are essentially putting it somewhere in the cloud in your own storage account, not in the virtual machine itself. So it essentially helps for your BCDR. So now you can enable the encryption. You can say, I want to back up all the system databases. You can configure your backup schedule manually. Say, when do you want to configure your backup schedule? What's your full, what's your log? Yeah, I know the question might come. differential supports? No, no differential backup supports today. But full backup, yes, we support a full backup and log backup. When you say automated, we see the log growth and automatically we take the backup and we do ship it to the URL. If not, you can configure on your own time and say you can play with it. Now, we will do this only if you enable it. It's by default disabled. So why? Because it's your server. It's in your infrastructure. We want you to have the power to do it. We are not doing this automatically for you. So it's all the choices are there. You can enable it. You can essentially play with it and make it better. Now that is the automated backup. We have the additional features to configure our services. But it is for those rare people who are using the machine learning, but you can essentially configure the R services. Rajesh will talk about this availability preview, but I will go switch to SQL assessments to start with. So SQL assessments, this is the one that I was talking about. You can enable SQL assessment. You can say, hey, I want to use my log analytics that is configured for my subscription, and I can configure the scheduling, when you want to configure, how do you want to configure, and you say apply, it will start assessing your SQL Server for the best practices. Lastly, security configuration. You can configure using marketplace image. You can configure using marketplace image, whether the port and everything. If you are not using the marketplace image, you are using your own images, you can still configure your ports. You can configure Windows mode authentication or mixed mode authentication. And also you can configure the Azure Key Vault integration straight from the portal. Lastly, this is what we are talking about, Microsoft Defender for Cloud. This one, as I said, you see a lot of recommendations and findings, but SQL servers on machines, as in this, when you click on that option, you see databases and what is the last scan time, what are the different authentication modes, should be Windows authentication, account default name should be SA, all of this you get, and you can essentially remediate it then and there. So if you click on it, we will tell you, hey, why the status is unhealthy, which benchmark we use, what is the query we used, all that. And do you want to dismiss this? You can essentially dismiss this alert. You can say, I don't want to have this alert. I want to make sure I want always mixed mode authentication. That's how I operate. Sure, then we won't show you this as your finding. So you can configure that too. So that's about the different different things that you can do with SQL Server IaaS Agent Extension. One small thing is, if ever you faced issues with SQL Server IaaS Agent Extension, like any other software, you can repair the SQL Server IaaS Agent Extension directly by going to the SQL VM bit. The other important thing that I really want to talk is the support requests. Maybe in Pam, we should really do one more session for all this support stuff. But very quickly, right? I'm very excited for this too. So when you, I don't know how many of you use this thing to open a support case in your Azure. We really invest a lot of time in making this pretty good. There is a team who is essentially working on this. Why? Because we work with the CSS, we understand what are the different support issues, and we go and we automatically, there are dynamic insights built into this, where it goes and tries to find your issue and gives you troubleshooting then and there before you even go to the support. So if you have any quick issues like configuring listener or connection issues, all that, I would strongly encourage you to go here. Or there is one other blade called Diagnose and Solve blade. I want you to please use this, because we really spend a lot of time there such that you guys can take care of these troubleshooting tools. Yeah, that's I think that's pretty much about it. And that's the demo. And before, Pam, do you want to add anything?
No, I just wanted to say that was awesome, Rajesh, Aditya, before Rajesh takes over.
Yeah, so...
Oh, actually, you had a couple more slides, too, before we handed over to Rajesh.
Yeah, right. So
there's one thing I wanted to double down on about everything you just covered, and that is, this is, with the exception of Microsoft Defender, this is all free. It's all included.
Oh, yeah.
When you run SQL Server and Azure Virtual Machine, you get that SQL Server IaaS Agent Extension, and everything that Aditya showed you is all included with that. So there's no extra charge there. You just install it, and you've got all those features. The only thing is, for Microsoft Defender, that's a separate product. You have to enroll in that through Microsoft Defender, and then we integrate with it. And then for the SQL assessments, you do have to provide a log analytics workspace. So there may be some additional charges for log analytics, but everything you saw in that portal, that's all just included. So there's no additional charges for that.
I just thought of saying that as free after I saying, but you stole my thunder, Pam.
Free with a little asterisk.
Yeah. So the call out is, please do go use this SQL Server IaaS Agent Extension. As I showed you, it's very easy to enroll. It is automatic SQL Server VM registration. Click that button. You will essentially get the. Maybe I will take like one more minute where I would say, when you go, click this button, go subscribe to because your subscription to SQL Server IaaS Agent Extension. You get a SQL Server IaaS Agent Extension in lightweight mode, which means you can only do license management. But if you want to use all the features, and we are continuously working to make more and more features such that your job becomes extremely easy. And again, all the power is with you. It is you who need to say enable. It's not us. The power stays with you. That one will come from full mode. Previously, going from lightweight mode to full mode requires a restart. Now, you don't need a restart. You can change your lightweight mode to full mode, essentially without a restart. And we already have a script. I'm about to blog that in a few days, where you can essentially push most all of your VMs in a given subscription from lightweight mode to full mode without a restart. No maintenance required. And also, I'm really, really excited to say that this IaaS Agent Extension was only available for Windows till date. Now it is even available for Linux. But in Linux, it is for canonical, that is only Ubuntu. Only Ubuntu distribution has it. We are working on getting it for all of the flavors. But as Pam said, this is all for free because we love our customers. We are doing this. And that's pretty much about it. I will hand over the next crucial topic to Rajesh. Rajesh, take it over, sir.
Sure. Yep. Thanks. Let me go ahead and share my screen.
Stop share. Yeah.
Can you stop sharing it? Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah. Done.
All right. Can you all see my screen?
Yeah. Sorry, I was just muted, but I wanted to say too, please, everyone, feel free to drop questions in the chat if you'd like to, while Rajesh is getting set up here.
Sure. Yep,
and we're just so you know, we're seeing your PowerPoint and not the actual presentation, Rajesh. There you go.
Okay, perfect. All right. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Pam. Thanks, Aditya. I think we also are caught up on the questions. I think Ravesh had questions, couple of questions. Ravi had one more question. So I think we are caught up on the chat. As Pam mentioned, yeah, feel free to pop in your questions in the chat and we'll try to answer them. All right. So with the overview that Pam presented in terms of value prop for, it's a no-brainer that we in Microsoft know how to run SQL Server. So obviously, Azure is the best place for running a SQL Server, right? And then what Aditya touched, which is again, if you ask me, I worked in the field. I've worked as a DBA as well. This is something that's free. Why not go and leverage it, right? This is a no-brainer where you just go on, install the IaaS Agent Extension, and take the free manageability benefits and all the other benefits that Aditya walked through, right? So now let's dive into the next section, which is the HA and DR part. Obviously, any big enterprise, when somebody, a company of any size, if they start leveraging SQL Server on Azure VMs, the first thing they would go is, hey, you're running some business critical applications, you need to meet your HA and DR needs, right? And there are two parts to it. The first part is I'll touch upon what are the Azure Infra options that you have to consider, and then we'll get into the SQL Server part, which again, will go back to the same theme that we want to, we have been touching across. I think both Pam and Aditya touched upon us. It's the same SQL Server, so end of the day, you will have the same options that you are dealing with on-prem, right? So looking at the Azure Infra options for the availability, right? At the VM layer, since you don't have the control on the infrastructure, so think of this the way that we think about when you try to migrate your workloads from on-prem to Azure, like you're rehosting the applications, right? End of the day, you don't own the physical host, but you rent the hardware, you pay for what you use on the VMs, the underlying infrastructure is on us. But we do give certain knobs in terms of how you want to design those infrastructure, right? Two options. One is availability sets, which is again a concept that has been there right from the day one of Azure. You have multiple fault domains, multiple update domains. End of the day, the idea here is we spread out these VMs to avoid single points of failure, right? Single points of failure across hardware, which is what is the scope for fault domains, and single points of failure for all the software updates that we do. Any updates that service impacting, we make sure that we don't take down two update domains at the same time. That's pretty much the notion. Availability zones, we are expanding our reach of availability zones to as many regions as possible. It's very easier to understand. Think of each zone as having independent data centers, all within physically apart, but within the 2 millisecond network round trip latency. So that way, each one will have its own network, power and cooling. So you're avoiding a single point of failure within one availability zone. So it's the most resilient architecture wherein you spread your VMs across zones, and then you have an application to connect to a VM, and the VM is always up and running. But the underlying point that, which is again crucial to understand is, when you have availability sets or availability zones, all of the SLA is guaranteed only when you have two VMs serving the same purpose. And that same purpose at the database layer will always translate to, hey, what kind of replication, when I say replication, not the SQL Server replication, or what kind of data replication that I'm doing at the SQL layer, because end of the day, you need to have more than one VM serving the same purpose, which in the SQL topology will always translate to HA and DR cases, right? So here's the point that we want to the message that we want to send across is, it's the same SQL Server running on Azure VMs. You don't own the infra, but you still own the VMs. You have complete control on SQL. You have complete control on what kind of technologies that you want to use for HNDR. And all the technologies that you know that you have been using in SQL Server on-prem, they apply to SQL on Azure VMs as well. Like starting with AGs, FCIs, lock shipping, backup and restore. I also included a fully managed PaaS service, which is the site recovery, again, very popular, which is again a PaaS-only service on the Azure side. So if you don't have a full-fledged infrastructure, if you want to looking for a PaaS kind of service which meets your all DR needs, yeah, go and feel free to explore the site recovery needs as well, right? And then I have a couple of arrows here in terms of explaining. When any organization or when an application team goes to a DBA and then say, hey, what's the best HADR technology that you can achieve at the data layer? The decision always boils down to the RPO and RTO discussions, right? RPO is the amount of data loss, and then RTO is the amount of downtime that you incur in case of any availability event. And as you go down the list from AG all the way to a DR only site, you can see that both RPO and RTO tend to go higher, which is expected, right? We know that AG, which is a flagship solution, we have been using it even internally to run our PaaS services, both for SQL DB and for the managed instance, tend to have a lower RPO and lower RTO. And as you go down the list, the RPO and RTO go higher, right? And in terms of technologies which are ideal for HANDR, as you can see, AG is pretty much ideal for HANDR, which is the reason why we had AG in the first place. FCI is a great fit for HA needs. And then as you go down the list, you can see here, it tends towards more on the DR side of things, right? All right. So with that, let's quickly compare AG and FCI. I'm You might have already seen this in multiple places. I won't go through every line item here, but just a quick things where it differentiates in terms of what's the fundamental difference between AG and FCI. One is the scope of availability. In an AGI, you're always dealing with a database or a group of databases, versus an FCI, you have a full instance, right? The number of databases, this is again a soft limit, but currently we have it at 100, but there are some workloads where we have seen customers going above the list as well. Some information around the compute cost. There are some additional threads that we spin up. This is again for lock capture and lock thread. Not a huge overhead, but obviously when you start scaling up your AGs to more than 100 or even higher number, you start hitting any of this compute limit. So you'll have to make sure that there's enough cores on the VM in order to handle that workload, right? The other big difference, which is in terms of storage, is AG will have its own copy of database because you are having your own replica. The data is stored locally, versus in an FCI case where the data is shared, right? And then in terms of storage options, pretty much both of them support everything in terms of premium SSD. For FCI, I have a separate slide where we get into all the storage options for FCI on Azure, because that's where, if you ask us, one of the nuances that customers have to deal with in the Azure infrastructure is on the storage layer, which is again what Aditya was explaining in terms of how we try to make it easy by giving you the benefits of manageability right within the IaaS extension. Right. So with that, let's take a quick tour on the FCI side of things. I mean, running FCI on Azure, I know we have had many options in the past. We started with storage spaces direct, then we gave an option of premium file share, and then as Azure evolved, we now have a flagship shared solution, which is Azure Shared Disk, right? This is one of the industry leading, first in the kind of industry where you can have a shared disk that's shared across two VMs, similar to what you would do in your on-prem, let's say iSCSI scan, right? Typically what I would have done on-prem is, hey, I would have gone to my SAN administrator and asked for a shared disk supporting iSCSI's protocol. We do exactly the same protocol that's supported on-prem. We support it in Azure world as well. And as you can see here, that's the reason why you can see this column is highlighted in green, because this is one of the solutions where we recommend, where if you have to lift and shift your on-prem FCI, this is your go-to option. It supports all versions of SQL, all versions of Windows, in terms of highest resilient architecture. Let's say if you want to go with zones, you can do that with shared disk. And this also supports the premium SSD with zone redundant storage. So now you can have an FCI in a highly resilient fashion, wherein you have two nodes sitting across two zones and still talking to the same disk. This is something that's industry leading. In terms of lower latency, we have also seen workloads where customers come in and say, hey, for my HA, we want to make sure that the two nodes, which are part of the HA, are physically closer to each other, because we understand that the primary purpose of HA is we don't want any kind of latency in an availability event. And yes, you can do that with a combination of availability sets and proximity placement group, which is what PPG stands for. And what PPG does is it's a logical construct. What we make sure is when you put in a bunch of VMs in a PPG, we make sure that we physically locate them in one data center. As Azure is expanding, as every region is expanding, within a region or within a zone, we could have multiple data centers that comprise that zone, right? And this is the nature of the scale factor that we're dealing with, the fleet of servers that we are dealing with, right? And it's something that's very known in the public cloud world. So if you want to say, hey, I want to group these servers, make sure that all of them stay within the same data center, then you put them in a PPG, and then we make sure that everything stays within the data center, so that way you get the lowest latency. The next option is with, I call it as a moderate resilient and latency architecture. And this is for reasons where, let's say, you want to have a bunch of VMs sitting in the same zones, and say you have a need for an ultra disk, which supports sub-millisecond latency. Then you put them in ultra disk, but ultra disk requires you to have all the VMs within the same zone. So which means you're definitely better than availability sets because you're going into the zone, but you still have to have all the VMs within the same zone. So that way the SLA is lower, but you still can leverage ultra disk if you have to. And then there are no feature limitations. We support storage pool, which is what Aditya was alluding to. When you try to set it up, we make it easy for you. And it also doesn't occupy the network bandwidth as what the S2D does, wherein the data is replicated using the VM's network traffic. We don't do any of that in case of shared disk. You have a dedicated bandwidth that's carved out for storage needs. So that way you are well within, you can use both your dedicated storage bandwidth plus your network bandwidth, right? So that's all about on the FCI side of things. I'm taking a look at the chat just to see if there are any questions. Support 1 DB, right? Enterprise 100 DBs.
Yeah,
Yep.
I'm answering that right now, unless you wanted to do
Perfect.
it quickly. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Pam. Thanks for taking care of that. All right. So with that, so let's get into the next section of the HADR portion, and also have, I think, we are doing good on time. We still have about 20 minutes time to go. So we'll also round it up with a demo as well. So what we do currently in the HADR.
We were going till 2:15, right?
Is it until 2:15? Okay. All right.
So. Unless I'm wrong.
All right. So I said
like 5 minutes left.
Okay, perfect.
To 2:15, and then you have a 15-minute Q&A.
Oh, we do.
Session.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, never mind. You're right, Rajesh. Go.
Perfect. All right. So yeah, I was the meeting invite was about 1 hour 15 minutes.
Oh
right,
yeah.
there
Okay,
you
you're right.
All right. So I'll wrap it up probably in, let's say, 5 to 10 minutes, and then we can open it up for Q&A, because we definitely want to hear from you, and this is your opportunity to ask questions. So I'll definitely open up for Q&A. All right. So in terms of the current state in HADR, which is where we have heard feedback loud and clear from customers, is whenever you try to create an agent listener or a SQL FCI, you need to deal with a load balancer, right? And this is for reasons because we don't have the address resolution protocol in public cloud. And when you put a bunch of VMs within a single subnet, you cannot have the mapping between the private IP and the MAC address, right? So without the ARP, the only way for you to have a SQL FCI or an AG listener, wherein you have the need for the IP to float across nodes, is through a load balancer, because load balancer exposes a property called floating IP, and we leverage that in order to move the IP from node 1 to node 2, and then give you the illusion that through the probe latency that, hey, when resources fail over from node 1 to node 2, you have the traffic that gets routed to your current primary, right? And this is a part where customers were struggling with. It's not easy for customers to set up LB and to maintain it, because you don't deal with it in your on-prem as well. So this is something, an additional point of failure in Azure world. There are also complexities involved in terms of port routing. So if you don't set it up properly, or in the event of some other rogue application trying to take up a port, then you are dealing with downtime, which is over and above what a failover would have cost, right? In addition, the failover and failback, the lowest that you can go with all the probe latency, it's about 10 seconds. So in addition to your failover time, you are looking at a good amount of 10 seconds for the failover to complete, and then for the traffic to get routed. And this is what this screenshot shows. So we provided some relief in terms of DNN. It was a great relief that we provided, but it still had its own limitations, wherein it doesn't support the default 1433 port. It also has some requirements around a unique port. And in case of FCI, it needs to coexist with an VNet. So there were some constraints and limitations that customers were complaining about. And what we did, this is again not new, what we did is SQL natively supports MultiSubnet. So what we do is, when you start putting VMs in separate subnets, as long as you have, and this could be within a VNet, within a single virtual network, or across different virtual network, right? And then start adding secondary IPs. And secondary IPs are also not new. Whenever you create a VM, you get a default IP, which is called the primary IP. And then when you go into the portal, and I think I'll quickly show it in a quick demo, you can start adding secondary IPs that can be dedicated for clustering and for agent listeners or FCI. And once you have laid this groundwork of creating the VMs in separate subnets and adding the secondary IPs, you're pretty much good to go. I mean, at this point, you are looking at the same sequence of steps, your runbooks, your troubleshooting guides, or the sequence of steps that you would have ideally followed in on-prem. You are good to go to follow the same set of steps to create cluster, to create AG listeners, or the SQL FCA. The only requirement is around multi-subnet failover, which is again not new. Most newer clients have it and they support it. But if you're looking at some legacy clients which don't support it, there's still a workaround that you can look around, right? And this is how the architecture looks like. I mean, you start with pretty simple in one region with following the principles of the most resilient architecture. You carve out two subnets, one subnet. In one subnet, you put in a VM1. In the second subnet, you put in another VM. And once you're laid out this groundwork and then created secondary IPs, which is what I was talking to, you're good to go to create clusters. You're good to go creating availability group. And you can do all of that right within the native tools. I mean, you don't have to leave the failover cluster manager for Windows. Neither you have to leave the SSMS or T-SQL interface if you have to set up all of this. And then you pretty much can do everything right within SSMS. We're very excited. This is something that we have announced GA last week, yesterday. We had a good data expo session as well, which we did it last week, but we generally announced this configuration yesterday. So what you can do pretty much is, I'll show you all of this in the quick demo. I'll quickly wrap it up. Once you have the VMs in separate subnets and then add the secondary IPs, you're pretty much good to go to create AGs or listener and then the FCI part. So I can quickly show the networking part. So let me show the secondary IP portion. So when you go to any VM and then click on the networking tab, and then you go to the network interface card, you see a bunch of secondary IPs, and I'll show that in a minute. So the first IP that you typically use there is the default IP, which is the default primary IP. And what you typically do is you add a bunch of secondary IPs. And this is what I've done as part of the setup. And adding them is also pretty straightforward. I won't go through the entire process, but I'll just quickly show you the dialog box, which helps you to create the secondary IPs. So once you lay this groundwork of creating secondary IPs on one VM, and then repeat the same steps on the other VM, at this point in time, you're done. I mean, you're pretty much done with this thing. And then you leverage the odd dependency for those VMs in order to create cluster, in order to create availability group listener or FCA part. I'm just trying to get into one of these demo missions where I can show the odd dependency, and that gives you a whole idea of the entire FCA part and the cluster part and also the AG listener part. As you can see here, what we do on the cluster side is an odd dependency between these two VMs. As you can see here, cluster natively says, hey, I'm dealing with two VMs. They are in their different IP ranges. They have their own IP subnet mask. As you can see here, it's 1038 1.0. The other one is 2.0. You get the idea. You get an odd dependency for the cluster. So that's on the cluster side. And we neatly extend that concept for listener as well, wherein the listener also has an odd dependency between two IPs that are dedicated for listener. And that's it. Once you have this thing set up and running, you can have your AG listener up and running in the same fashion. And if you go into SSMS, you can pretty much see that, hey, I have my AG listener. It is mapped to two IPs. I know that when a failover happens, one of them will come online, and then I'll have to route the traffic. So this will completely eliminate the need for a load balancer, which I know was one of the biggest pain point in the HA space where customers were struggling with in setting up HATR on Azure VMs. So I think with that, I'm pretty much done with the demo as well. I'll pass it back to Pam, and I think we still have opened up the 15 minutes for Q&A session. So feel free to unmute. I mean, I'm sorry. Feel free to ask questions in the chat window. We'll hang out and then answer all your questions.
Yeah. Rajesh, you want to put up that call to action slide for me?
Sure. Yep.
Since you're already sharing.
Yep. There you go.
Awesome. Thanks. So yeah, thanks everybody. Yeah, please feel free to ask any additional questions you might have. We've got a couple of links here that could be helpful. One is that first one, SQL IaaS Perf. That's a pointer to all of our best practices. We've taken a lot of time to revamp our documentation and make sure you have all the best information for how to configure your VMs. A lot of the stuff we covered today, the sizing, everything. Then we have, migrate, lots of tools to help you migrate to Azure, automatic registration that Aditya was talking about. And then I thought I was going to add the link, but it looks like I forgot to add the link. We do also have a data exposed series on Azure VM. We've recorded a number of videos that you can find, some of them on channel 9. And we do have, if you go to the data exposed channel on YouTube, we have our own playlist of SQL VM videos. So you should be able to find that in a search engine. And then if anyone, if I come up with the link, I'll try to post it in the questions here as well. So yeah, please feel free to bring in the questions.
Yep. Yeah, that's a great set of resources. I think the data expo series, we did a bunch of five episodes, starting from the value prop for IaaS extension, all the way touching to storage cap, perf, ask the expert, and also the HADR. So I think that's a good set of resources for you to explore. Let me take in, I think, 2 questions. I think Ravesh asked about AG.
The GNN one, that's a good question, right? Yeah.
Perfect, yeah. AG listener can be configured via load balancer. Yes, Ravesh, I think that's the current state. For creating AG listener, you need to have a load balancer in order to achieve the floating IP functionality. This is when you're dealing with VMs in single subnet. But as I showed you, if you're dealing with VMs in multi-subnet, then you completely take load balancer out of the equation, right? I didn't get your question right now is DNN. So I think if I understood your question correctly, and feel free to correct, Ravesh. So the recommended approach that we are saying, and I can quickly show you this in the blog as well.
He just sent another question, Rajesh. I don't know if that helps. Right now, just now you shadowed with static IP is DNN. Any limitation on load balancer, VNN, SSIS, SSRS DB is part of AGR cluster aware.
If I understand that question correctly, yeah, I think there is no limitation on load balancer VNN. I mean, VNN works with a load balancer absolutely fine. I mean, if you look up one of the blog where we published recently, which came out yesterday, was around, let me open this up. We also give you a good explanation around comparing all the options. And if you see here, if you have VMs in single subnet and you put them in a load balancer, there are no limitations at all. I mean, VNN does work. It does work with other products as well. I think SSIS, SSRS, I have not personally tested with the load balancer part, but on the SQL engine side, there are no limitations if you're going with a load balancer. The only caveat with the load balancer part is the complexity that you have to deal with. And that's exactly the reason why we have prescriptive guidance saying, hey, if you are dealing with AG on Azure SQL VMs, go with the multi-subnet approach because it's much simpler to easy to set up and maintain. You don't have to deal with any kind of external component because every external component will bring in additional set of bells and whistles that you need to watch out for. So go with the multi-subnet approach. It doesn't have any limitations, no failover latency, and it's easy to set up and maintain.
Ravesh is also asking about sending them.
I'm getting the link for him. I think we're talking about the video link. I think I got that. I got that right here.
Yeah.
And then the other question, I don't know if you guys want to talk about it. I thought this was a really great question.
Yeah, that's a good question.
The managed instance one.
Yeah.
Yeah, you want to talk about that one, Aditya? And
yeah, sure. Yeah, so that's a very famous question. Yeah, so like we are providing all the manageability stuff. Should I really go for IaaS? Should I go for MI? What is that really drives someone to go to MI versus IaaS? So it's a very good question, right? So the consideration that you need to have is what is your workload? What is your workload right now you have? How much of control you need? And how much of that you think you want to manage or Microsoft want to manage? You want Microsoft to manage. So let's say I have a very mission critical 128 core or 30 terabytes or 40 terabytes machine data, then of course it is IaaS because MI doesn't have that capability right today. But if you have a workload where it is around 8 TB and you can essentially let Microsoft control it. I do think MI is a great option too, because the reason why I think is you have all the intelligence and you will get all the patching, backups, and everything is taken care by Microsoft, but not by you. So, but there are design consideration changes where if I am on IaaS, I might need to think of like a DBA who needs to control the permissions, who needs to control different types of stuff like performance and everything. Whereas in MI, you have all the performance quotes you can get through intelligent query processing. All that you will get the latest and greatest of bits in MI. So you need to like mix and match all this to say if my workload is suitable to MI versus if my workload is suitable to VM. Did I answer that question? You want to add something, Pam?
Yeah, no, I think that was good. I mean, if anybody needs more clarity
or something, please.
Yeah, drop another comment or another question. So we did put the links in. So Rajesh put his link for the blog that he just showed. And I also dropped the link to the YouTube. So look at Ravish's question, send me the link. And you'll have our links there to the YouTube playlist and to Rajesh's blog. And then, of course, you have the links on the slide, too. So if there's any more questions, feel free to. Looks like we've got several more minutes. So if anybody wants to add any questions, let us know. Otherwise, Rajesh, you want to just show up that last slide, maybe the session evaluation slide. Always important for feedback. It would be great if you have feedback for us about the session or about the event. Please do fill out your evaluation. We take your feedback very seriously and we try to make adjustments as needed. So happy to hear your feedback today, and definitely I'm sure the past organizers will be happy to hear your feedback about the event as well. Okay, I don't see any other questions yet. The other thing I wanted to say is we do have tomorrow, there's going to be a roundtable type of discussion, like a SQL Server Ask Me Anything for the SQL Server team. So if you're interested in meeting Bob Ward and a whole series of SQL Server PMs to ask all of your questions about SQL Server in general, hopefully you've heard about the new great features coming with SQL 2022. That's going to be a great session tomorrow. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about that. And then we will also continue to have new videos coming out on YouTube that we'll keep adding to that playlist as well. Okay. And then if you do have any additional feedback, you can always feel free to reach out to us on Twitter as well. We do try to keep an eye on that too.